Thank you very much, Professor Allen. It's always good to hear somebody talk who knows what they're talking about, and you're certainly well on top of your subject. Our intention now is to try and take some questions from the floor. I think, out of respect for Professor Allen, if you could just maybe give your name and profession when you ask your question, and hopefully we'll find some ones that test him a little bit. So I assume you can hear me, can you?
I can hear you fine. Yes. Shall I stop my share? I'm just trying to work out how to do that.
Okay.
I'm struggling to stop the share, but sorry about this. Oh, there we go.
Might be able to hear it.
There we go.
There we go.
I'm back.
Lovely. Okay, so if we throw it open to the floor, anybody got any interesting questions for him or hard ones? John?
Far away.
Probably I think you might know the answer to this straightforward, but why did in 2000 all of the graphs plateau at that particular point in time?
Did you get that one?
Was the question, why did agricultural warming plateau out from 2000 onwards? Was that the question?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So since 2000, methane emissions from UK agriculture have been falling for various reasons. I mean, they've been falling since the 90s. The BSE crisis, the foot and mouth, and so on. This has all resulted in substantial reductions in herd size, and also, presumably basic economic drivers as well. So as a result of those falling methane emissions, the warming impact of UK livestock agriculture has actually been coming down. So it's been allowing global temperatures to fall. There's also been a warming impact of nitrous oxide emissions, fertilizer use in UK agriculture, which has been pushing global temperatures up. And these two have balanced, and we've ended up with flat global temperatures, pretty much flat since 2005 or so. So, when you add up all the different impacts of UK agriculture on global temperature, they balance out, and there hasn't been much impact on global temperature from UK agriculture since 2005. Now, that said, of course, UK agriculture did cause warming before 2005, but over the most recent 15, 20 years or so, it hasn't caused any more warming, unlike other sectors like transport and so on, which have been carrying on driving up global temperatures.
Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have another one? Darren, I think, is up the back, yeah?
Wood-grown crops like hemp that absorb a lot of carbon, and the byproducts being used for house building, where it absorbs carbon over decades, is a good idea for rotationary crops. And if it is, why isn't government pushing that?
So I didn't catch the beginning of that question.
He was suggesting, would it be a good policy for hemp to be grown as a crop and used in building with this byproduct?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting idea. I think we do need to look at the way we build, because cement is actually going to be becoming an increasing fraction of the UK's emissions going forward if we carry on with conventional building methods. And that would be that'd be an area which I think we need to get the incentives in place to encourage that. I mean, as I say, I think generally, if the incentives are right, most people, most of the time, make mostly sensible decisions. But if the incentives are skewed, as farmers are well accustomed to, when you have subsidy regimes, for example, that incentivize perverse outcomes, you get perverse outcomes. It's not the fault of any, it's not the fault of the farmers who make the, you can say farmers make the wrong decision. No, if the incentive scheme is skewed, people are going to end up, making decisions that don't make sense. So that's why I feel that, if we're trying to incentivize reductions in global temperature, we should align incentives accordingly.
Okay, thank you. Any others? Go ahead.
Around the sort of potential kind of story of the greenhouse emissions post the point where they enter the atmosphere. You're saying that the methane will degrade maybe over a sort of 20-year span into CO2. and therefore you need to, or you could knock off your methane on your accounting from that historical period. But what does it do once it is CO2 in the atmosphere? Does it then have a separate warming potential as its behaviour in its right as CO2 going forward then? That needs to be accounted for? Or
So I was getting snippets of that, but if I understand you correctly, the question is the methane is oxidized or burnt, so to speak, into CO2 once it's in the atmosphere. So if your cow belches some methane, that methane will end up as CO2. So what about the warming impact of that CO2? Am I right? That was the question?
yeah.
Yep. Okay. So yes, of course, that is quite correct. That is what happens to the methane. But of course, the methane comes from grass. You know, the carbon atoms in the methane will have come from grass that will have extracted that carbon from the atmosphere in the first place. So that's just replacing CO2 that was in the atmosphere all along. So we don't need to worry about the CO2 that's generated when methane from cows decays in the atmosphere. It's different, of course, if your methane is a leak from some fracking operation or from a coal mine, or so it's fossil methane, then of course you do need to worry about that CO2 because that's new carbon being introduced into the climate system. But that doesn't mean that, sometimes people hear this and think, oh, does that mean that biogenic is the jargon phrase? Does that mean that methane from cattle doesn't matter? It still matters because, of course, methane has a very different impact on global temperatures to carbon dioxide. It is a much more powerful greenhouse gas for as long as it's there. So we do need to take into account the impact of our methane emissions on global temperature. We need to, which is all the more reason why we need to bring livestock agriculture into climate policy. But for me, this means it's all the more reason for making sure that it's done in a way that's fair on farmers and reflects the impact of different decisions on global temperature.
Thank you. Peter?
Following on from that, what's the value of an acre of grass? How much does that sequester compared to how many trees?
Right. Okay. So okay. So I'm afraid I don't have sort of carbon stocks in my head numbers, so I couldn't answer that question. But one, I mean, I think I have 10 tons per hectare as a potential number, but again, it depends very much on the nature of the land and the types of trees you're growing and so on. And it's also, but an important point of principle that I am confident about is that when you plant trees, you take up carbon quite fast for sort of 20, 30 years or so, depending on the tree type. And then, of course, the trees mature and it stops taking up carbon nearly as quickly. So you need to take that into account as well in your, if you're pushing for switching, say, pasture land to forestry for the sake of climate impact, you need to take into account that the climate benefit is it's front loaded. It's not going to keep doing what it's doing forever. And one of the things we are seeing, I gather, in many parts, I don't know if this is happening in the Isle of Man, but I do know it is happening in many parts of the UK, is that large tracts of land are being turned over to monoculture forestry for the sake of carbon offsets. And this can have all sorts of quite negative impacts on both the local environment, biodiversity, and indeed the social environment. I mean, and this may be partly driven by, as I say, the rather skewed incentive structures we have at the moment, which are very much skewed towards converting land to forestry for the sake of carbon credits, and don't really reward biodiversity, for example, in the same way.
Okay, crack on. Tim, is it?
Yes, thank you. So just kind of try and quantify this for the Isle of Man situation, looking at Manx agriculture. And if we say, for example, that our national herd beef sheep is either level or falling, which I think is probably the true situation. And we have a grass-based livestock system, grazing-based system, then in that context, that as a model, that's a very positive model into what we've been talking about as far as contributing to warming.
Yeah, I mean, the chances are, I'm afraid, thanks to Sarah sending the numbers through, I haven't had a chance to run the numbers, but it'd be quite straightforward for somebody to do it. And I'd be if anybody's interested in doing so, I'd be very happy to work with them on that. The chances are your herd is actually not causing, in the way it's being managed at the moment, it's not causing very much global warming at all. Of course, that said, if you were to reduce the methane emissions from your herd faster than you are doing, or faster than 0.3% per year is the sort of break-even rate, then you might actually be helping out other sectors by reducing global temperatures. And if you were to do that, you could easily argue, just as somebody who plants trees to absorb carbon dioxide that's being produced by drivers in another city, you should be rewarded for doing so. But at the moment, in the way our incentives are designed for farmers, you would not be. And that's, something that I think we need to have a conversation about.
Thank you. Okay.